Hi everybody, welcome back to Language Friendly Classroom Tips. This is session 3 and it's divided into part 1 and part 2. And within both parts we're going to be talking about how to support learners with an auditory decoding deficit in CAPD within the classroom setting. Just to recap briefly on what we have spoken about within the previous sessions, we have been focusing on an association deficit in CAPD, these being your students who struggle with classic information overload. So the longer and more grammatically complex the spoken or written information becomes, the more difficult it is for them to understand it. We've spoken about how to support them in terms of the oral language that we use within the classroom for our teaching instruction, as well as how to support them in terms of the written language instruction that we use within the classroom setting. Okay, today within part 1, we're going to be focusing on what is an auditory decoding deficit in CAPD and the different symptoms or difficulties that may present within the different stages of the schooling system. Okay, so what is an auditory decoding deficit? This is your truest form of CAPD. And when a child has this particular difficulty, it may be referred to as an auditory dyslexia, or it may also be referred to as dysphonesia. And the child is able to process or understand and to recall spoken and written information which is grammatically complex in nature, provided that it is presented within an ideal listening environment. The specific situations can occur within an environment that may make it less than ideal to listen within, and this is when these children struggle. This may include extraneous background noise, which is your typical classroom situation. Many studies recently have found that even within a quiet classroom in which independent silent work is taking place, there's still a continuous buzz of about 65 decibels of noise. So classrooms are a very noisy place. When a student is taking part in a conversation, and there's another conversation taking place in the same room, they may struggle to process the content of the conversation in which they're taking part. And they might struggle to understand a teacher who speaks with a very fast rate of speech, or possibly even an accent for that matter. Okay, how does this affect our student in terms of the schooling system and the different stages of the schooling system? Let's start first with the kinder years. Within these years, the student may present with unclear speech, so they've got articulation errors within their speech, and this is because they are struggling to process the correct way to produce these sounds when they're listening to speech. And most of the time, let's be honest, when you're taking part in a conversation, it is a less than ideal listening environment, and so they process or they learn to recognize these speech sounds incorrectly, and because they're recognizing them incorrectly, they learn to use them incorrectly within their own speech. They might struggle with phonological or sound awareness difficulties, these being your prerequisite skills, the most important skills required in order to learn to read and spell sufficiently. They include rhyming, and these children might struggle with simple rhyming tasks, like even learning nursery rhymes might be difficult for them. They'll struggle with syllabification, which is clapping out the beat of words, of long words. They might struggle with initial, final, and medial sound identification tasks. They might struggle in games like I Spy with My Little Eyes, something beginning with pa. A game like that would be very difficult for them, and they're also going to struggle to count the sounds contained within words. And then, obviously, they're going to struggle in a classroom environment or in a less than ideal listening environment to understand and recall spoken information. Okay, how does this affect our student within the early primary school years? Well, again, they're going to present with difficulty processing or understanding or recalling information in the classroom setting. Their clarity of speech might still be affected, and they might still have articulation errors, which means that when they're starting to spell, they're going to spell the way that they say a word. So they're going to spell incorrectly because they're spelling it the way that they are talking. They once again will have phonological or sound awareness difficulties, and they'll present with a reduced development of word attack skills. And these are the fundamental auditory skills required in order to be successful in reading and spelling words that we've never seen before by recognizing the sounds and sounding them out. And because they present with these word attack difficulties, they tend to become highly visual readers in a way of compensating. So they start to learn to read words off by heart rather than developing their auditory skills, which is great if they come across a text in which, they've seen all the words and learned the words. But unfortunately, reality of life is such that, especially in a student's life, they're always going to read text and it's always going to contain words that they've never seen before, which means they'll have to rely on their auditory skills in order to read or decode these words. Right, how does this affect our learner or our student in the middle and the high school years? Well, again, difficulty processing and recalling information in the classroom setting. These children will also struggle significantly to read. This is because their focus in reading is still on the mechanics of reading, instead of on reading for meaning. So they are therefore very, very slow readers because they are still trying to sound out words. And because they're slow readers and there's no reading fluency, the meaning of the text is lost. This leads to reduced ability to understand or comprehend what they are reading. And because they're not comprehending what they're reading, they cannot use the text in order to analytically think about the text and answer those problem-solving questions. So they struggle to reach that deep text understanding level. In terms of their written language, these kids actually, or these students, if you ask them to plan out orally an essay or a narrative story, they would not struggle to do so, provided that they're obviously familiar with sort of the text structure, this being your introduction, your body, and conclusion. But as soon as they have to write it down, they'll be unable to reflect their good story or narrative or essay in a written form. And this is because they're struggling so much with the spelling. So what they do is they attempt to write as little as possible. So their sentences become short and simple, and they avoid using that really important content vocabulary that they may have learned, because they might not know how to spell those specific words, so they avoid using them completely. And because they're so focused on their spelling and how difficult it is for them, they tend to forget to include all of the parts of the story that they planned, and they also tend to forget punctuation, often altogether. And in maths and science, they're going to have difficulties because they're going to struggle to decode these highly complex words contained within these specific subjects. Okay, that's the end of part 1. Please skip ahead to part 2 to see how we can support these learners within the classroom setting.